Hello and welcome to Exclusive here on France 24. Our guest is the richest man on earth, once again, with a net worth of $76 billion, thanks to Microsoft, the software giant he founded years ago and to which he recently returned in an advisory position. But most of his time and his money is now dedicated to the foundation he created with his wife, Melinda. You're spending some $4 billion a year, mostly in the field of global health and agriculture in poor countries. And as such, our guest has become a central player in the field of development at a time when Western countries are showing serious signs of donor fatigue. Bill Gates, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
You recently declared that within 20 years, there will be almost no poor countries in the world. Are you dreaming?
No, actually the progress has been pretty amazing, and I think it's not widely seen because people see headlines about bad news, but good news sort of happens a day at a time, gradual improvement. For example, we've cut childhood deaths to be a third of what they were 50 years ago, and in the next 20 years I think we can cut them in a third again. And yet I think if you interviewed most people, they'd know about Ebola epidemics and problems rather than the great work that's achieved that result.
But for instance, I won't take every figure, but over 6 million kids under the age of 5 died last year. It's a huge number.
It's a huge number, and that is something that drives our foundation to want to move faster and invent new vaccines, get them out to all children. But it was 20 million a year, even when there were a lot less kids being born. So you had about a 20% chance of dying before the age of 5. Globally, that's down to 5%. But a lot of countries, it's still up around 20%, say in Nigeria or many other parts of Africa. We need to get those vaccines and drugs out to these children.
That's a huge challenge. I mean, since its inception, your foundation has granted over $28 billion, I believe. That's half of what the US government spends on global health every year. So you're spending huge amounts of money. And so this begs the question, in some countries where governments are not so active in those fields, you become the major player. And this begs the question, are you acting instead of governments in some countries?
No, in no way. The overseas development assistance is be about $130 billion a year, and we spend $4 billion a year. Now we're focused in a few sectors. We focus on health and agriculture, and we put a lot of our money into innovation, funding scientists to do new drugs and vaccines. So in that kind of research area, we're second only to the US government in funding research. But when it comes to delivery, actually taking the HIV drugs or the bed nets and getting them out to all these countries, we'd be a very small part. Now we are partnered with these countries. We care a lot. That's why I'm meeting here in France, in the UK, Germany, Sweden, Norway, the US. The big donors share goals with us, and we're excited to learn from each other.
But in some countries where government infrastructure is very weak, very poor, aren't you playing a major role? And could there be a risk that you're sometimes seen as imposing your solutions on countries where not much has been done?
Well, we only have 1,000 employees, and so we're giving money to World Health Organization. We're giving money to, for example, the government of Ethiopia is doing a really good primary health care system to reach out. You always want to work through the governments wherever possible. There's a few places like Somalia where you end up depending on non-government organizations. And so we do grants to save the children and care and things like that. But you won't find Gates Foundation employees out in any of these places.
Right. So when you work with governments, sometimes you can work with corrupt governments. How do you deal with this? You hand out a lot of money. How can you be sure it goes to the right places and the right people and not to some pockets or bank accounts in Switzerland?
Well, the beauty of health is the ability to measure the impact of what you do. So for example, our biggest grant ever is to buy vaccines for these countries. And so there's no cash going to the country at all. what's happening is they get to order the vaccine and it's free to them. So a diarrheal vaccine called rotavirus, a respiratory vaccine called pneumococcus, that's now being made available to all the children of the world. And so we can trace and make sure that they get it out there. We can look at the vaccine coverage. We can look at how we're reducing the death rates. So of all the aid categories, the one that lends itself to minimizing corruption, it's really health. You can make sure that at most a few percent are going astray.
So you're pretty confident there is accountability of where your grants are going.
Yeah, and sometimes we find some small amounts, like we'll say, do this training or go do this outreach thing. There are cases where the worker doesn't do it. That's true in rich countries as well. You've got to have measurement systems, and you want to be able to catch anything that would get to a measurable size where it's really reducing the impact. Because for us, for every few thousand we spend, we're saving a life. And so if we're not careful, we're essentially not just wasting money, we're wasting lives.
But in addition to possible corruption, there's also a more political issue, bad guys, I would call them. Would you deal with any regime in the world? Would you go to Syria? Would you go to North Korea? I mean, a starving kid is a starving kid, whatever his citizenship. Or do you make decisions saying, I can't work with this regime?
Now, in terms of making vaccines available, we have funded vaccine availability for North Korea. We've funded vaccine availability. We haven't met any kids who don't deserve to live. And so when it comes to vaccines, yes, those are now going out to all the countries of the world. The main limiting factor is that some countries don't build good delivery systems, and so it's hard to reach. Only about 35% of the kids in Somalia are being reached through the NGOs doing the work there. In the north of Nigeria, only about 30% of the kids, actually less, are being reached there. So our desire is to get it to every kid, no matter which government they're under, and we're working to improve these delivery systems so that that's doable.
Right. I want to get to the issue of development aid. Obviously, there is an economic crisis. Western countries are cutting back the budget, the debt, and they're certainly not thinking about development aid as a priority. You met the French president. You're trying to meet them. They're supposed to reach a goal of 0.7% of GDP. Except the Scandinavian countries, no one reaches that goal. Are you afraid that they will cut back?
Well, in fact, the European country with one of the worst deficits who cut every other budget category, which is the United Kingdom, achieved 0.7%. And so they made it a priority. They said that they're going to help the poorest in the world.
But it's an exception.
But it's $16 billion a year. And what it means is that because other donors have largely stayed flat, very few have actually cut their money, that we still are seeing an increase. The U.S. has gone up somewhat. We have new donors. Korea, which was an aid recipient only 40 years ago, has now turned around and become a good aid donor. And so it is tough times. We have to make our case very well. But I can say that the dollars that go to these health causes are more impactful than any government spending that gets done. People need to know that it's well spent, and I get to go and see it. I get to make sure it's measured well and say, hey, this is why I'm taking all of my money and putting it into these causes.
You're also focusing on what's called neglected tropical diseases, because you believe this is an area where there can be a major impact very quickly, especially in the poorest areas of the world. Can you tell us what this is all about?
Yeah, there's a group of diseases that many of which are worms, many of which live in your blood. They're awful diseases. They're mostly in Africa, so most people have never heard of sleeping sickness or onchocerciasis or, leprosy. If you read the Bible, you've heard about that one. But between these 10, the overall disease impact is right up there with the big single diseases like malaria. The amazing thing about these diseases is there are 5 of them that if we go out and give drugs on an annual basis to everybody of a certain age range, it's called mass drug administration, then you largely eliminate that disease.
And those drugs exist already.
Exactly. Although we need a few more to be invented, but there's a lot that do. And so 2 years ago, we got the drug companies to commit to free donations of literally hundreds of millions of these pills. And so now all that remains is to get the funding to actually do the delivery. And because we're combining these diseases together, the efficiency of that delivery is far, far greater. And so we are seeing progress against these diseases. It's too soon to say they're not neglected, but maybe 6 years from now we can say they were formally neglected.
Polio eradication, you said by 2018 this would happen. There are 3 countries where it's still endemic: Afghanistan, Nigeria, and Pakistan, and often it's all about politics. Do you think you will reach that goal?
We're still optimistic. The last 3 countries were always destined to be 3 very tough countries. It's the north of Nigeria, where getting to a high enough percentage of the kids should give us success. And assuming that electoral distraction or Boko Haram doesn't create too much of a tougher environment than we have today, we're quite pleased. The government's been working with us, the state governors. The quality of the campaigns is the highest it's ever been, and the cases are coming down. So we're hopeful for Nigeria. Pakistan, the Taliban has made it hard because they're attacking vaccinators. They have areas where they don't let the vaccinators get in. And so that needs to change in order for there to be a success in Pakistan. But even there, we think that nobody wants children to be paralyzed, so the truth should be victorious.
The UN just issued its last report on climate change, and it's a very somber assessment, saying this could cause more problem in terms of health, agriculture. Simple question: will global warming unravel all your efforts?
No. The rich world has to reduce its CO2 emissions, and we have to make African agriculture more resilient to drought and heat and various things. But this can be done. The rich countries have work to do. It's a very important issue, but it will not erase the wonderful progress being made here.
So you're still an optimistic?
About that issue as well.
Okay. Bill Gates, thank you very much for coming on the show on Exclusive.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.